everybody. Chris Herbert here with another episode of Pricing Talk. I've got Alex Saghatelian here with me. He's currently the Global VP of Strategy and Ops at Okta and was previously VP doing pricing and go-to-market companies like ServiceNow, Hitachi Ventana, Workday, and started his career consulting at Accenture, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. So welcome, Alex. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
All right. Well,
happy to be here.
Good. Well, hey, I appreciate the time, and let's just jump into things. I think with your experienced VP at a number of places, probably people would have a lot of questions for you. I think the big one that I get asked is kind of, maybe we can talk about kind of that switch from, coming up to then leading a pricing function and kind of that VP level. Any thoughts you have around how to be successful at kind of, maybe let's start with making that transition, and then we can kind of talk about maybe building teams and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, sure. I think the way I think about the space is there's sort of the price setting, with new offers and products that you take to market. And then there's the sort of other side of it, which is more of the price execution and how do you actually do the deals and price realization and all that. So a big part of the focus as you think about this as a career space is, there's different avenues of starting, right? Some of the career folks and, spend time more on the product side with the business units on, sorry, my cat's in the background saying hi, with the business units working on how do you package innovation, how do you set the price on it, for example, if you're in a B2B tech space or technology space. And then, the other side of that's the go-to-market. So then how do you actually sell it? How do you position it? How do you manage discounting, promotions, all those programs, et cetera? So I think, both ends are great ways to start the career. I think building an understanding of different foundational aspects. If you're trying to figure out how to package and price innovation or a new offering to take to market, a big part of that is sort of figuring out what are the data points you need to triangulate, whether it's competition, your next best alternative may be do it yourself or some other aspect from a nascent market. What are your internal economics? How do you think about customer and the customer perspective and those sorts of things? And sort of working with teams that are building these offerings and helping them think about what's not only the way to bring it together, but then from a packaging, but then also like what's the price to value that you want to set from a go-to-market perspective. So I've seen career paths, my own career path. I think I've had the opportunity to, build a foundation on both sides of the coin. I've had the luxury of working with product teams on, new ideas and innovation. And I've also had the opportunity to work on the go-to-market side, all the way to the front line with deal execution and deal strategy and all that. So I think it's important to know that you don't have to start in one place. And the function typically sits in lots of places, depending on the flavor of the week or the company. It could be a finance-based function. It could be a marketing-based function. It could be an operations-based function, a go-to-market sales function at times, depending on which side you come from. So I think the thing to keep in mind from a career perspective is the main thing you want to start getting foundationally early around this topic is making sure you understand, whether you're more in the price execution side or taking products into the go-to-market and driving success from how do you capture value there, or if you're working on how do you package and bring it to market, is understanding how all the pieces connect together. Because I think people that are successful and can grow their careers don't operate in silos, and they're able to sort of traverse and understand the upstream implications of how they're bringing an offer together, downstream implications, how do you actually sell it? Because the thing I've seen is sometimes if folks working in those areas don't have the ability to think horizontally and really get in the customer shoes or get in the seller shoes or the partner shoes and understand what they really need to think about there, it's quite a bit of a challenge to show the breadth of your skill set and impact and make a real meaningful difference in the space.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. So kind of, I think maybe some of the people I think struggle with kind of that first time director role and kind of, I'm seeing a lot of these roles kind of being land and expand, right? Like come in here, be the individual contributor, and then, kind of earn a team. How have you kind of seen like successful ways to maybe, grow or sell the function internally to kind of get more? I mean, you've built some pretty big teams, so maybe, building more headcount or just kind of even getting started getting that one additional headcount.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I definitely agree. It's a space where there's a lot of earning it and not it hasn't been sort of
give it to you
maybe as established of a functional pillar into many companies. So I think the first thing is understanding what the burning platform is for change or what the opportunity set may be. So some of this comes down to business impact and quantification. So in some of the environments I've walked into, there's been, some noise in the system, whether it's customers saying, hey, too complex to do business with, or, things are not intuitive, et cetera, or we feel like we've got a lot of new innovation. We're not sure how to make it coherent for sales to be successful in market, right? So there's typically some indicators for why the initial hire is being made to start building some breadth in it. I think the ability to be really successful at getting investment in the function, and even if you're a plant the flag director and trying to build a function, is first of all being able to say like, okay, what is the opportunity? How do you think about what good looks like and success looks like? And having a view of like prioritization around time to impact and time to value, and showing that there's a way to get iterative improvement and quick wins and show progressive improvement that actually will justify how you can build credibility and get more investment over time. So prioritization is important, and making sure, like I said earlier, part of it is you can't just operate in a functional silo. Like I've seen this movie many times where teams are like, hey, we should move to a good, better, best packaging, or like I can bring this new approach and all this stuff, but they don't have a good connection to how the sales teams work and how they sell and how the customers buy and the customer journey with the products and things like that. So really making sure that you're bringing along the go-to-market leadership, the product leadership, finance, operations, marketing, all the functions in a vision of what the opportunity is, and doing a bit of when you come into a company, that 90 days, like go do a diagnostic and understand, okay, like what's working, what's not working, what are the areas that could be helpful, what are people's points of view, getting some understanding of customer. You might have NPS data, Net Promoter Score data, or just anything you can ascertain about customer partners, the different ecosystem of stakeholders, and then taking that landscape and then translating that to here's kind of a heat map of things to go after, and then establishing a roadmap. And I've typically gone in and I've established a POV through that due diligence, and then typically lay out a vision and then show how like talent investment ties to that, and what are the hot spots where you need to sort of land some talent to get the function scaling up, right? Because most companies, even if you're a smaller company, having one person on pricing typically doesn't scale very well. You need a critical mass of some sort between analytical scale and business partnering and working across the business, and also understanding the market and customers and those sorts of things.
And kind of a question off that just comes to mind. I think, and at least my experience, I think pricing professionals struggle with raising their hand and taking credit. And it sounds like you kind of build some of that in up front of like, all right, here's what we're going after, and kind of doing a good job articulating. Is that kind of how you start that process, or how do you take kind of full credit and not let sales or someone else try to raise their hand and claim that revenue?
No, I think it's actually a double-edged sword. I mean, the reality is it's kind of a thankless job typically, and that's the nature of the beast with it. Typically, you get the blame when things aren't working well from an execution perspective, whether it is directly related or not related. If you're losing a competition, pricing is the issue. If you're winning, it's great execution on go-to-market, for example, or the product differentiation, so on and so forth. So I think no matter what, you're going to get the heat on one side if things aren't working well. So if you have a vision and opportunities that you have identified, being ambitious about like what the opportunity size of the prize could be is important, but then understanding the realities of the organization. I think at times it's easy to get very theoretical about like, if I run a model and say, hey, if we get this much improvement, we can drive this top line and bottom line impact. It's easier said than done. So I think being realistic and pragmatic about that, but then also saying kind of here's the art of the possible. Here's where we are in our maturity journey. And if we can start moving toward that, there's a huge opportunity for us long-term to get meaningful uplift. And then, sometimes testing and learning or running focus pilots and getting some quick wins is a good way to show, even if the indicators are in the right direction, you don't always have to sort of show this like massive outsized impact. I think the point is you're showing impact that can actually drive long-term viability and success. And then finding ways to have KPIs and metrics to track around that progression. So setting realistic objectives and targets for yourself, and then showing and proving to like a finance organization in particular, like, hey, that this is real money and real impact is important, right? But the control, and there's influence versus direct ownership, and lots of this stuff is influence at the end of the day. And I think being able to understand how to position that and the dependencies from those other functions to achieve the impact. So then, if you're doing your piece of the equation and you can't control the value chain end to end, you still, everybody understands, well, you delivered here and here's where maybe there was a breakdown. And is that something that we called as a dependency for success? And what's the get well plan and those kinds of things are important.
Yeah, no, that's great. Maybe getting more to the not candidate, but from my perspective, it's a lot of candidate stuff. But when you're building teams, maybe kind of going down to maybe some of the lower levels as people are coming up in their career, what are you looking for when you're bringing on new talent, or are there things that jump out for you for, people should be doing earlier in their careers these days?
Yeah, I think, pricing type roles, monetization type roles have it's sort of an intersection of a lot of skills, in my opinion. I think there's obviously a lot of aspects to it earlier in careers about the analytical rigor and thinking and ability to synthesize and analyze data and come up with recommendations. But there's also soft skills involved. How do you actually take data and combine it, quantitative and qualitative, and bring it together and tell a story and simplify the message? I think most senior executives and companies do not want to get into the nuance on pricing methodology and how you get there, or can absorb it fully just based on kind of the nature of the altitude they operate at. So I think it's important to know, how do you balance granularity in that process? And the thing I'm looking for with talent is it's just not the IQs, the EQ side of the coin, because what can happen, some people may take a more literal approach. Hey, I went and did a third-party research study, or I ran a sophisticated conjoint analysis. Here's what I found. The optimal price point is this, and here's where we make the most money exactly. And they're showing all these precise things. Depending like what type of business you're in, like an enterprise B2B, there's no perfect list price. There's a lot of this negotiation, and you got to just have a realistic view and know how to balance quantitative with field feedback from your sales teams or your partners, your customers, and balance complexity and simplicity with value capture approaches, right? I think what I've seen in some earlier career professionals, sometimes some people tend to go too heavy on like purely the analytics and research side, and then sort of miss the boat on some of the normalizing the thinking for the realities of the business and how the business really works. So what I encourage early in career folks to do as I look at talent is people that have intellectual curiosity to understand how the business really works, and not just the pricing mechanics of doing the pricing work, but actually understand what's our product strategy, what are some of our business objectives, how does our go-to-market really work, really understanding the connection points of how pricing intersects, because it intersects everything in the business, is important, right? For me when I look at candidates, because if they're too single-threaded in their thinking, whether they have the experience or not is one thing. I'm open to getting people experience maybe earlier in their career that is more focused, but showing that they have that mindset where they wear the enterprise mindset and how they want to develop their skills and make impact.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, there's, I think a lot of people are trying to figure out where to go in their careers and what they need to learn. And, there's not one, one right or wrong answer. But I think that curiosity and that kind of drive is something across the board that I think everybody's looking for. I think one thing, obviously you've been successful in getting to the VP level, which I think is in our world an accomplishment in and of itself, and staying there. Any kind of thoughts or advice for people kind of looking to make that jump, or to, how best to get there, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to, depending on the scale and size of an organization and the maturity of how pricing fits in the company. Pricing has a lot of synergies with other areas. Like in my current charter, I'll have the deal desk function as well as pricing. I've got some of our business strategy and planning and product strategy, some of our MPI processes. So I've got QBRs, how we do some of the rhythms of the business. So I got multiple areas, for example. I think the part of the bigger picture, if you're thinking about a VP scope role around monetization, pricing, some of these topics, is you really need to think about the end-to-end pricing process, right? And understand what's the value of connecting all those pieces, because you have the strategy setting and like I talked about a little bit up front, the front end of the process where you're thinking about how to price and package, what the pricing model may be, and how your monetization strategy, and then you get to more of the price execution and downstream. So the ability to show the connection, the importance of the connective tissue of all those processes. Your strategy is only as good as your execution. Your execution informs your strategy, and the ability as you're positioning that to show the interconnection and strategy and operations as well, because pricing operations is a big part of executing on the strategy. And the intersection with deal desk and other areas like competitive intelligence or business value. There are a lot of synergy points. So I think in my career, I've been able to bring together a comprehensive view of what a best practice value chain looks like for pricing excellence. And that typically is multi-threaded, and it's not just about BU product setting pricing with a business unit. It's the whole thing, right? And so the ability to connect those pieces. In some companies, not based on how the functional structure works, maybe not everything is fully integrated, but the ability to convince and get buy-in that we need to build this connective organization. I think getting a VP level scope opportunities built out is easier the more you show that integrated impact story, right? Because if you don't, then it's sort of hey, well, I could just have my chief product officer have a few people working on this thing, or I can have a couple of people and go to market doing this thing. And but this is a centralized center of excellence that you need to bring together to really drive scale and impact across the company and bring the company hat on it, right? If you're doing pricing, the more balanced you can be with understanding product, go to market, finance, operational considerations, marketing, so on and so forth, the more impact you actually can have.
So are you pushing for that during kind of the interview process? Because I know, at least from the early days of the Okta pricing function, it was very, very much kind of just pricing and then maybe a little deal desk. Were you able to acquire those other things as you went, or kind of are you kicking that off in the interview process, look, to be successful, I need more, here's how I do it, and here's what I need to be successful?
Yeah, I think, I have the luxury of having done it a few times with, Cisco, Workday, Hitachi's built and scaled functions and seen kind of, what good looks like and how to build great, in terms of the impact. And so, I'm able to bring some of that blueprint. And I think there's obviously consulting firms and external parties and benchmarks that you can use. And talking to peer companies is always a good thing, or bringing some peer perspective to the table. Hey, here's what other companies are doing that are considered best in class in their space and how they're approaching the problem. So I think, for example, and then in the Okta context, it was, as I came in, there was a bit of an opportunity longer term vision that I laid out, and there was general consensus around it. It's just more of like building some credibility, establishing, starting to pick what are those hotspots to focus on, and then starting to build that connective tissue of how it comes together. And I think over time, it's the pieces started getting aligned, right? Initially, it was kind of more of me building the case for change, and then showing that, the idea of bringing a center of excellence with all these things together allow us to move faster and drive higher impact outcomes for the company long term. And so we were able to progress in that direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think far too often people are focused on getting the job and not actually kind of setting up, using that interview process to kind of lay out their own plan, or kind of talk through and make sure, at the same time, it's a place that they want to go to because they're bought in enough. Because I think far too often it's like, I want this job, I need this job, I'm just going to say what I need to say to get the job, versus making sure that it's a fit and there's enough there for you to be successful and get the tools you need.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think company culture matters. I mean, Okta's got a great culture, and it's a builder, learner, owner, collaborator culture. And so, there's a lot of openness and entrepreneurial spirit around bring your ideas and build together. And so I've been able to come in. I would say it wasn't like easy out the gate to kind of get alignment on all these things. And it's I always encourage people to wear the enterprise hat. In my career, I always am wearing the company hat, no matter which function I report to. I think is the Achilles heel of a lot of people in many corporate environments, and that just might be pricing issues. Like having your functional allegiance is important to your management hierarchy, and supporting your leadership and all that's important, the priorities of your function. But when you're doing this job, like this job is a cross-company effort, and you got to always wear that mindset. And so you got to build those relationships, build the connections, show how the better together aspects of, if you're trying to solution something, your strategy is only as good as your execution, and then those things need to interplay effectively and be synchronized. I think that's an important part of it, because to your earlier point, this is not an established sort of mature functional area in most companies. And so it's a lot of it's education, building the case for change, showcasing why, even through pilots or even just like more virtual teamwork and dynamics, how the threading these things together more holistically actually gets a better outcome.
That makes sense. So in your you talked about the 90-day, and the importance of that. Is that where you're spending kind of probably prioritizing? Obviously, you kind of talked about the plan and all that and figuring out the hot spots, but are you kind of prioritizing building those relationships too as part of that process? Because I think for me, a lot of people struggle to get those relationships done, and they come and tend to be maybe a little bit more head down on pricing versus building that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also a bit of a signal in the interview process. Who are you interviewing with?
Thank you.
I'd say in some of the companies and some of the, like my experiences with Okta and ServiceNow as examples, like I interviewed very cross-functioning at the senior leadership level, and it was pretty comprehensive in nature. And I really appreciated the sort of importance they put behind the process and interest from all the cross-functional leaders. I think if you're coming in on an opportunity and like you're talking to single-threaded from a function perspective in the conversation, that's probably that means the company's thinking more in a narrow way, and you either got us through that process, open the aperture of the discussion, or it could be a signal that the leader that's hiring this doesn't see the cross-functional interlock as important, or the cross-functional aspects as relevant. Oh, someone else in the company has, say, deal desk or some other things. So I'm just worried about my piece on how do I price my products, and that's not necessarily a high success situation if that's how. So I'd say use those indicators, on the front end of the process, like pretty much in all my executive roles, and it's typically you'd expect that for a bigger scope job, that you're sort of multifunctional in nature and interviewing and talking to folks. So when I come in, I've already regardless through the interview process, already talked to certain stakeholders, but then I double down on that. I go, on a listening tour and understand, how does pricing intersect, all aspects of the customer journey, from how do you acquire a customer to how do they adopt and get to success to how do they renew, all the aspects, how do the partners work with them, and just really understand sort of the machinery and how the pieces come together. And then understanding what are those, there could be common threads of pain points that sort of intersect across, and there could be bigger operating model or engagement model issues. Like, for example, sometimes product and go-to-market teams might have a little bit of, misalignment in certain areas, and that ends up exasperating around pricing, right? Just by nature of it. And so understanding some of those bigger, sort of call environmental or systemic things that are at play, and then how do you sort of work around some of the constraints or help maybe bubble up the need to address some of those dependencies for success.
One thing that I tell all my candidates is understand who you're talking to, and then understand who you're not talking to, because that sometimes is more important, and or maybe the one that they're trying to hide from you. If sales is involved in the conversation, that means they're either not on board or or there is a little bit of concern there for them that, they're kind of keeping them from you. So understand, and try to look for, not everybody's going to be bought into pricing. And so understand who you're talking to, try to figure out who you're going to need to win over or spend more time with, and use the interview process as a tool and as a guide for, starting your role and collecting the data points, from before you've even started. So I think that's a great point. Kind of jumping back, I think I'm kind of trying to go from more experience in the career to kind of earlier, kind of, MBA consulting experience. How do you think that impacts the pricing journey? Or, I think I'm seeing a little bit more of consulting kind of being requested now versus MBA. What's kind of your thoughts if you were kind of starting over your career again? Where is your head at on that?
Yeah. I think an MBA is a personal choice. I did an MBA, partly for me was to just step back and kind of reset a little bit, build some broader relationships, expand my toolkit, and just sort of think about my career trajectory broader and longer term a bit. I don't think when I look at candidates, I think an MBA is representative of just continued achievement in terms of continuous learning and rounding out. I don't think it's a hard dependency by any means. I don't just sort of, if there's a qualified candidate that doesn't have an MBA, I'm not going to, require it. I think if you're thinking about developing into the space, it all depends on where you're coming from. I've seen people work in product management that come from more technical backgrounds that want to get more business acumen. And so the MBA sort of gives them the ability to retool a bit and expand and build a bit more of the business acumen that can help them position into more say, a pricing career or, business planning type of role, in my org, for example. So I think it could help with some of those transitional points. I think, the consulting background, I think having a mix of talent as you scale a pricing function that, has domain expertise as, the technical expertise of pricing and pricing to value or value-based pricing, those kinds of things are important. But a lot of pricing, most companies are going through a pricing transformation if they're investing in this function. Pricing is not a static thing and just we got to fine tune this knob and that knob. It's typically a pretty big overhaul. So the ability to plan work, have work back plans, work cross-functionally, synthesize information, a little bit my point, to drive decision-making, design decisions or considerations that balance data, quantitative and qualitative data, drive sort of urgency and change into the system. So I think having some versatility, I think having some consulting experience in your organization is important. So if you come from a consulting background, I think it can help you sort of be more versatile and adaptive and all that. But I think the same thing with consulting, that the watch out there is, and I started my career in consulting is, as an executive, you have an executive sponsor as a consultant in many firms. And so at Accenture, we'd come in and, you could kind of traverse the org and you weren't sort of that embedded in the politics or dynamics of the org. I think when you go in-house, regardless, you got to be able to adapt to the dynamics and build those long-term relationships. But I do think both, I'd say like consulting, depending on the makeup of your team, like as a hiring manager, like depending on the composition, I think it's good to have folks that know how to drive work forward and drive change into the organization. And I think the consulting background typically is conducive to that, more so than someone that has just done pure like a functional role or around pricing. So I think, the learn how to learn is an important thing. So smart, people that have shown the capacity to learn and drive impact in new areas is important. So you got to just round out the skill set, I think, as the function's building. So I think as a early in career individual, I think, depending on where you're coming from a background, if you are coming from more like a finance background, do you need an MBA to do pricing? Probably not. If you're coming more from maybe a product background, would it be beneficial? It might be a little bit more beneficial for you, for example.
Yeah, to understand the whole company and kind of dive into some other areas. And yeah, I think, I take a lot of career consulting people and put them into kind of in-house pricing roles. And, it is a change because like you said, it's building those relationships. They're able to come in and kind of give a recommendation where they may have spent $500,000, $1 million, $2 million. Executives are going to listen to you versus having to build those relationships where you're not just getting a seat and getting everyone's attention, because they just paid you a bunch of money and you're coming in that way.
Yeah.
And they have to kind of learn, all right, how do you play the political game and how do you handle that change management, which, I think is probably the hardest aspect to the pricing, journey. Yeah, no, that was great.
Yeah, and I think a related point to that is like an indicator sometimes that might be interesting to understand is a willingness to invest in supplemental surge capacity with like a consulting firm if there's a burning need, right? Like, and so as you're, whether you're building a function or you're a part of a function, I think back to like indicators of importance through the interview process or just kind of as you're thinking about the org, if there's a willingness to invest in like, hey, we know we need to do a transformational effort on this and we're willing to put some money behind it, whether some of that is, internal headcount, some of it's external consulting support to get to that. I think back to that whole case for change or building the plans, that's a way, as you're building a function to get scale and fast impact while you're sort of building the justification to have more of a run rate investment in the function. And that can help sort of balance the talent mix of like, how do you move fast and make impact as you're trying to build a case for investment.
Yeah. I mean, I think, a lot of these functions too are coming out of the newer pricing roles and kind of those, land and expand first time directors. I think a lot of them are coming from consulting engagements, right? Where they're asking you to kind of step in and they don't necessarily know what, know what they need yet, but they know Simon Kucher or Accenture or, Bain or whoever's kind of telling them, hey, you can't, we're giving it to you at a point in time, but you need to kind of keep the ball rolling. So it's kind of the understanding that,
that's right.
Understanding that change or that kind of handover. Well, any thoughts? I know we're kind of a little getting up against it a little bit time wise, but any thoughts as kind of from the conversation or anything, maybe advice for some of the, people at it, I guess early in their career, late in their career or anything along those lines?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I would say don't let inertia get you to, if you have ambitions of a broader career in the space and having career growth and broadening your impact, you need to show that intellectual curiosity and put it out there. And like I said, get the understanding of how across enterprise things work, build those relationships, identify opportunities, because, otherwise, there a lot of times you can be pigeonholed into you're good at setting, product pricing, and you've done product pricing for 5 years, and here's another product pricing role. Like, that's the thing that can easily happen. And it's somewhat comfortable too, in the sense that like there's always a demand for the roles, and there's some progression you can get to, but then you'll cap out to some degree. But if you really want to have a comprehensive career and broad career in this space, you got to be willing to get out of your comfort zone and actually, even if your personality is maybe more inclined to work with like engineers and product people than it is maybe salespeople, you got to still get out of your comfort zone and learn how to traverse the organization and show that intellectual curiosity. I think I strongly encourage that and put it out there and show and continue to think about ways to build skills in adjacent areas and connection points, because the analytical skills and the strategic thinking that goes in this space intersects lots of things. Like it intersects your product strategy, it intersects your go-to-market strategy, your financial strategy, some of your marketing strategy, how you execute and win the business from a success perspective. There are lots of new product introduction processes. There's a lot of intersection points. So like at the end of the day, understanding those intersection points, how do you help those areas be more successful? How do you connect the pieces that maybe are suboptimal around those intersection points? I think that's important if you really want a long-term career that has a balance of learning new things, but also providing growth. Because I've had a lot of talent that have worked for me throughout their careers, and some of them sort of tend to just kind of take the least path of resistance, and sort of then they end up kind of getting into rinse and repeat roles over and over again. And I think that applies to later in career as well. If you want to actually scale into broader roles and that have broader impact, that provide the opportunity for VP level scope, you need to show that enterprise engagement and impact that you can work across the org to do that.
But how are you getting then to like getting involved in those other things? Are you asking to be involved and say like, all right, the new product releases, or, how are you handling those? I think it'd be easy to be like, hey, we should be involved in this, but is there a way you found to kind of, get involved? I know you've mentioned pilots, which I think is a great thing for people to kind of maybe utilize instead of like jumping all in on some of this stuff. But is there a way you've kind of found, Yeah,
that's a good question. I mean, I think at the end of the day is you're doing a bit of that discovery diagnostic, just working across the organization. Just if you really do like the stakeholder map or web around like what are things that somehow touch the topic of pricing or have sort of like upstream or downstream dependencies, you'll naturally intersect all these areas, right? And so it just, maybe your job role might be more narrow in the context of that web and the sprawl of where it touches, but doesn't mean you shouldn't understand how those areas are working or not working, right? Because there might be things downstream to you that if there was more that people have frustration or pain points about, or maybe are suboptimal, that if you did something different upstream with some other cross-functional teams, it can improve what happens there. So I think the ability to show a bit of that, those connection points, and where it may be, what are those areas that sort of intersect and connect with the pricing processes, is important. And I think by nature of that, you have the opportunity to maybe help other teams be more effective at what they're trying to do. And then by nature of helping them, you're sort of opening the door to showing that like there's more impact you can have or pricing can have in the
that makes sense. I mean, I think probably to that you're kind of finding out what I like to call the cookie lickers, which I learned from a former boss, the people that that it's their cookie and they don't want you to eat the cookie, so they lick it so that you won't eat it. But I mean, is some of that too, just figuring out who's open to working with you and letting you be involved versus like, all right, we'll just have to X out this area for now, and these teams are more open to kind of us jumping in and helping out.
Yeah, I think it's how you ask questions and how inquisitive you are. If you're asking like narrow focus questions, or you're asking open, broader questions, like what's top of mind for you? Like you're working with the finance team, well, like what's key what are the key priorities for you? What's important for you, for the business? How do you think about areas around like, for example, pricing? What are some other areas that relate to that may be? So if you have the right aperture, and again, back to my point about wearing the company hat, if you're always coming at it from a company lens and having a bigger, broader conversations, then you can understand like what else, there's something about profitability over here that, like, if we did a little bit more on how we execute pricing on or manage discounts here, maybe we can help with that margin consideration there, or, those kinds of things that can show themselves. So I think, you just gotta be willing to ask maybe a little bit broader questions as you go on your engagement with functions and show that you're trying to help, in a broader sense, the company's success, right? And not just, you don't want to, back to the cook, like your cookie, and I've never heard that one, but, some people say, hey, stick to your swim lane. That's my swim lane. That's people have to be respectful of like accountability and ownership, but at the same time, in high growth companies or transformational situations that companies are going through, people can't stick in their swim lanes alone to help the company achieve success. Like, we all have to be swimming in the same direction and not, hitting each other, across the lanes, or like, some lanes are wide, some lanes are narrow, some lanes are, closing off and that kind of thing. So that's what I'd say. I'm always trying to encourage my team to build relationships and understand bigger context of how the business is doing and how what are things that are sort of intersecting some of our key stakeholder functions that are beyond maybe our focus area.
Pulling down some of those swim lanes. Well, hey, look, I know we're up against it, but thank you so much for the time. I know this is going to be really helpful for a lot of pricing people that I think struggle with some of this stuff. And I think, hey, there's roles that we're all going to struggle in, and no matter how experienced we are, they're just not ready for that pricing change. But I think this has been really, really great. So I appreciate the time, and we'll have to have you back again and kind of dive more into the details of things. So appreciate the time.
Yeah, likewise. Good seeing you, Chris, and you have a nice weekend. Take care.